Beacon Press Audio presents The AOC Generation: How Millennials Are Seizing Power and Rewriting the Rules of American Politics by David Freedlander. This audiobook is narrated by Alyssa Marino. Published by Beacon Press Audio, 2020. Introduction. The Happy Hour. Summer was nearly over. There was a slight chill in the air portending the coming of fall, and New York City had begun to empty out for the Labor Day 2017 weekend. But one bar, just below ground level, on a side street in the city's East Village, was packed, as it was most Thursday evenings. That's where a couple of dozen leftist political organizers and advocates started routinely gathering at a happy hour hosted by Sean McElwee. McElwee, then just 24, looked like a 12-year-old inflated to adult size, dressed in a too-small t-shirt with a baseball cap askew atop his head. But his weekly happy hours at the dingy dive, he asked that the name of the bar not be used because right-wing protesters might crash it, quickly became an essential stop for the city's activist class in the months after Donald Trump's surprise win in November 2016. Gathered most Thursday nights at the bar were newly minted socialists, tired campaign workers, government staffers, think tank types, and others devoted to a wide variety of progressive and leftist causes. To be there and to be over 30 would be considered ancient. McElwee could often be found at a table in the back, where a steady stream of friends, well-wishers, and journalists stopped by. When I met him that evening, he berated me for not using his quotes in a story I had written. He also predicted that one day his own children would find him to be a moral degenerate for eating meat, and said that he was working on building a world where eco-terrorists could receive veterans' benefits. On the night at August's end, one of the people who swung by was a little-known, long-shot congressional candidate named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, looking impossibly put together in a black dress with a white quilted blazer and more than a little out of place in a neon-lit bar that hadn't changed its decor in 45 years. She was there at the invitation of McElwee, who had been hyping online the slew of left-leaning challengers running for offices up and down the slate, and inviting most of them to come drink with him and his pals, part of a renewed interest in electoral politics by a mostly younger generation, horrified at the prospect of a Trump presidency. He direct messaged her on Twitter at a time when Ocasio-Cortez had only a few hundred followers and invited her to come by. At the bar, she put Led Zeppelin on the jukebox and lamented how New York's notoriously closed electoral system was making it nearly impossible for a candidate like her, a young Latina from the Bronx, to compete, especially against the behemoth that she was running against, Joe Crowley. He was not just the likely next Speaker of the House of Representatives, but also the head of the Queens County Democratic Party, which meant there was a whole apparatus of election lawyers and judges in his thrall, and that the entire city's political class was in his corner. People who were there that night remember Ocasio-Cortez as being, for a politician, unusually interested in hearing about what the different activists had done in their various lines of work. "What I remember is that she just kind of lit up the room," said Matthew Miles Goodrich, an environmental organizer who had just begun to work with the Sunrise Movement, a youth-led organization founded in 2017 and dedicated to slowing climate change and making issues of environmental justice central to the U.S. political debate after decades of neglect. "I went to Sean's happy hour every week, and there were a lot of candidates coming through, and it was just immediately clear that this person was pretty fantastic." While most candidates who came through seemed to do a quick appraisal of who would be helpful to them and who wouldn't be, Ocasio-Cortez seemed genuinely excited to be surrounded by organizers working to build political and social movements, according to those who were there, and she pelted people with questions about the details of their work. By that summer night, it was already clear that something was afoot in America. This book is the story of that something. It is the story, in part, of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of how she rose from the life of an adrift 20-something making her way in New York to an overnight sensation, the likes of which the political world had never seen, becoming an icon of pop culture in the process. But no person, no matter how dynamic, is the product only of their own will and talent. All of us are pushed quietly along by thousands of unseen hands, are the product of society and circumstance, the place we were born into, and the people we come to know. And so this isn't just the story of Ocasio-Cortez. It is the story of the people who powered her rise, and the circumstances in the city and in the nation that made her rise possible. Ocasio-Cortez was the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, and her appearance on Capitol Hill was seen correctly as a harbinger of a new, ascendant generation, one pulling the nation leftward, fed up with politics as usual, and fearful of a future in which ecological catastrophe, widening inequality, and the rise of illiberal populism threatened life as they had come to know it. They were the best educated and most diverse generation in the nation's history, and in the wake of the election of Donald Trump, many of them decided that if anything was going to change, they would have to do it themselves. Ocasio-Cortez was one of those young people who faced that choice, and she was the beneficiary of similar choices thousands of young people made who decided that if anything was ever going to change, they would have to change it themselves. This story is the story of both them and of her. It is not an endorsement of their tactics or their ideology. I am a political reporter, and so it is rather an examination of a new force that looks set to have a large role in our politics for decades to come, and a look at how Ocasio-Cortez stepped into a moment that was waiting for her to seize it. I live in Ocasio-Cortez's district, and watched as her long-shot campaign pulled off one of the upsets of the century, and I interviewed her when she was campaigning and desperate for any kind of coverage. Neither Ocasio-Cortez nor her office participated in this book. I interviewed her twice while she was in Congress for a story for New York Magazine, and her comments to me in this book come from that conversation. I interviewed dozens of people who knew her at various times in her life and who were willing to share their memories of her, and dozens more who got engaged in politics around 2016 and helped make this moment, the Ocasio-Cortez moment, possible. The biggest single force that helped make AOC possible was Bernie Sanders. Without Sanders, there would almost certainly be no Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. An avowed Democratic socialist, he ran one of the most vocally left-wing campaigns in U.S. political history. More surprising, it nearly worked. Sanders, a senator from Vermont, almost won the Democratic primary, despite running against an opponent, Hillary Clinton, with vastly more resources and almost the entire Democratic Party supporting her. Sanders won more than 2 million votes from 18 to 29-year-olds in the 2016 primary, more than either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump combined. In Iowa, the first state to vote in the Democratic primary, Sanders beat Clinton among this cohort by 70 points, 84% to 14%, according to a caucus entrance poll. In New York, despite being the home state of Hillary Clinton, voters 18 to 29 turned out in record numbers toward the end of the primary, and Sanders beat Clinton among them by 30 points. Tens of thousands of people poured into his rallies, and tens of thousands more signed up to volunteer. Sanders was by no means the first left-wing candidate to run for president. Every campaign saw at least one candidate pledging to represent the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party or restore the party's liberal soul. Dennis Kucinich in 2004 and 2008, Howard Dean in 2004, Ralph Nader in 2000, and Jerry Brown in 1992. They each promised to get money out of politics, to end foreign entanglements, to reform America's messed-up healthcare system, and to close the widening gap between rich and poor. But although they each generated excitement, particularly from a curious political press corps, They each faded fairly quickly.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?